All right, well, welcome. Today is October 4th, 2018. This is the third stakeholder meeting from the State Allocation Board for the full-day kindergarten facilities grant program. I'm Michael Watanabe, Chief Program Services for OPSC, and with me is Brian Path, our Policy and Operations Manager. So about this meeting today, like I said, this is our third meeting. We had one back in August and in September. If you'd like to view those webcasts, they are available on our website. Today, as a result of all the feedback we received at those meetings and via email and phone calls after those stakeholder meetings, what we brought back today is proposed forms, regulations, and a grant agreement for administering the program. We welcome any feedback after this meeting. We're hoping by COB next Thursday that if you have additional feedback on anything you've heard today or as we've gone through the regs, some thoughts on those. We'd appreciate that back as soon as possible. Our ideal goal is to take these regs to the October 24th board meeting for presentation to the State Allocation Board for approval so that we can move these regulations through the administrative law process. A little bit of background, if you're not familiar, Assembly Bill 1808 added the full-day kindergarten facilities grant program to the Education Code. As part of the 2018-2019 Budget Act, $100 million was provided by the budget in cash to provide one-time grant funds to school districts that either lack the facilities for full-day kindergarten or they have a need to retrofit facilities for full-day kindergarten. So what we'll do today is Brian and I will walk through the grant agreement, the regulations, kind of at a high level which each one does, and if you'd like, we can go farther in the weeds to the specifics of each individual regulation. Before we go into the regs, we do want to address any questions and comments we received from the last meeting, so we'll take care of that part first.
All right. Brian LePasco, OPSC. So if you turn to page 2 in the packet, there's a few questions and answers we had outstanding from the last meeting. If you look over the last two meeting items that we published, there's a bunch of Q&As in those two, and we actually have implemented I think everything that was either missing from the program or we thought the program could allow. So we've incorporated all that stuff. We've also incorporated the things from these questions, but these are the ones that came up at the last meeting. So the first one is basically asking if you're doing a like-for-like replacement of an entire school or part of a school, if you could combine that the modernization project with the full-day kindergarten project. So it'd be like a hybrid. SFP modernization as well as full-day kindergarten, and basically the answer is yes, you can do that. You would need to qualify for the full-day kindergarten program in of itself, meaning that you'd have to meet all the qualifications for that portion of the project. Just like the SFP project, you have to meet the qualifications for that portion of it. And we would only ask that you clearly delineate in all your documents and your plans and of course your expenditures as well, just clearly which classrooms and which work goes to which project. Just like with any other hybrid project, really. So we don't see any issue with that. Next one is our transitional kindergarten pupils. Basically, are they part of the kindergarten population? Or are they part of this program? And the answer is yes. For the purposes of full-day kindergarten, there's no distinguishing between transitional kindergarten and kindergarten pupils. But we do look at them in totality. So we don't provide facilities for them separately. But we would combine the enrollment that you have for both of those different populations of students, and we would provide facilities accordingly. The third question is there a specific format for the required full-day kindergarten program resolution that the district turns in? And we'll talk about the particulars of what's in the resolution later, but we don't have a template at this time. We may have one in the future, I'm not sure, but it's really up to the district what they'd like to put in there. There are a few minimum things you have to have in there, but aside from that, it's kind of at your discretion at what you want to put in there. The last question on page 2 is basically asking, I can read the entire thing, but basically what it's asking is if you have a site, either a situation where you're adding kindergarten grade level to a site that doesn't currently have it, or if you're expanding some kind, could you use full-day kindergarten funds for that? We don't think the statute provides for that ability. It's not to provide for growth, it's to house existing kindergarten or transitional kindergarten pupils. And so if you don't have kindergartners there right now, there's no seabeds at the site for kindergarten, and you're basically, that site is growing to include kindergarten kids. Whether or not you're expanding your classroom base isn't really the issue. It's just that you're providing for kindergarten kids that aren't there right at that moment, so they're not existing kindergarten kids, so we don't think it fits in the program. And then last question on page 3, do full-day kindergarten projects have to participate in the priority funding round? And the answer is no. We already have the cash available for the program, and the reason why we do priority funding in the school facility program is that we have to wait for bond sales. So we don't have that here, so the funds will be released pretty much as soon as you're ready for them. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna go quite a ways forward in the package and talk about the regulations. It's on page 47 if you're following along, and we created these. A lot of the information you'll see in here is very similar to the school facility program. We basically took some of the ideas that are incorporated in both programs and just kind of tailored them for full-day kindergarten. And I'll talk about which ones are brand new, which ones are kind of we did that. We kind of manufactured them. But just kind of going through them. So the first one, 1860, is you'll notice it's a different rule set. It's not 1859, the way that school facility program regulations are, and that's because this is outside of the school facility program. So it starts with the 1860. That first one there is just general program information. What it provides. There's $100 million available, etc. 1860.1 just talks about how basically OPSC will carry out the program on behalf of the DGS director. And then 1860.2 is the definition section. Most of these are come out of the SFP. They won't look new to you. There are a few that are different. I'll highlight those. On stamp page 48, down at the bottom, we have our new forms. We define what a full-day kindergarten classroom is. We redefine the word fund to be, for the full-day kindergarten. And then kind of moving on page 49, we define low income, which I think may or may not be already in the SFP, but it's really important in this program because that's going to determine funding priority. New construction, and new construction grant are updated to include full-day kindergarten provision. And then on the last page, on page 50, we have the retrofit information, and we redefine program to mean the full-day kindergarten facilities grant program for this rule set. Moving on to page 51, the header is down at the bottom of page 50. It's 1860.3 for general. This just basically is saying that you must file a 7001 when you apply for funds, which is very similar to the 5004 for SFP. It's a funding request. And then going down into funding guidelines, part of the statutory requirements of this program is that all the funds must be encumbered by the board by June 30th of 2021. So we've had, we're outlining what happens if we get funds back in the meantime. So if we get funds that either are returned or are unspent, whatever it might be, if it's before the program ends, if it's before that date, they'll return to the FDK fund. If they come back after that date, they'll actually go back to the general fund where the allocation from the program originated from. So that's what that details. 1860.5 is program eligibility criteria. And there's basically 4 provisions here, or maybe just 3. There's 3 of them. You have to have, with the 7001, you have to turn in a school board resolution providing approval to provide full-day kindergarten instruction at the school site that's being requested. You're certifying that the district lacks the facilities to provide full-day kindergarten instruction. And along with the application, there should be a description of the project that includes the total number of kindergarten classrooms at the site before the project, the total kindergarten enrollment at the site, and again, that'll include TK. And then the total number of classrooms that'll be at the site or at the completion of the project, and then also the overall increase to the number of classrooms, if there is any, to the overall school site. So those are the kind of the things that must come in with your form. Application submittal periods, going over to page 52. We have 2 funding rounds outlined. They're coming quick, and the reason for that is because of the requirement to have the funds encumbered, within about 3 years. So the first funding round is going to begin January 2nd of next year, 2019. It'll run through the end of January. And then the second funding round will be May 1st through May 30th of 2019. So we realize that's a quick turnaround, but that's also why we provided the ability to come in without having DSA or CDE approvals in place. You can get advanced funds. So we're hoping that works out. We wanted to give everyone the maximum amount of time, and that's the reason why we designed that the way we did. 1860.7 is the application types. There's basically 4 of those. There's a standard new construction grant where you have all your approvals in place, and then there's a new construction with advance. You can get advance for design and or site acquisition, just like with SFP. And then same thing with the mod, or in this program it's called retrofit. You can get a retrofit grant if you have all your approvals, or you can come in for an advance for design. If you do have a advance application, you have 12 months from the apportionment to come in with your approvals. So it's very similar to like Career Tech, for example. Moving down, 1860.8, the district must hold title to the land where the project will be built. And then over on page 53, to determine the apportionment level, there's a few sections in there, and basically what it's talking about is we're going to use the SFP level K through 6 base grant for the number of pupils in the project. There's add-ons for fire alarm, sprinkler, and then we decided to, instead of having the normal site development worksheet that we have with SFP projects, we're just giving 35% for these projects. 35% of the base grant will be allocated for site development, and that number, where that comes from, is we looked at all the new construction projects we've ever funded through the SFP since back to 1998, and what percentage of those allocations included site development, and it came out to be like 34.8%. So we've used that number 35% before. We use it for guesstimating facility hardship projects and how much site development will cost, and so it's a number that we've used before, and it really kind of just worked out when we looked at the metrics for it. So 35% for site development, 12% if you're increasing the base grant if you're building multi-level classrooms in the project, and then there's also project assistance available for these projects. All of these amount, well, not all of them, but the per pupil grant amount and the fire alarm and sprinkler grants will be increased every year with the construction cost index, just like it is with SFP. Moving on down to the next few sections are really talking about site acquisition. I don't think I need to mention much here. I mean, I think most of you are familiar with the way site acquisition works for school facility program. It's pretty much identical. The only couple things I wanted to call out were that at our previous meetings we had been talking about lease sites and provisions around using the funds at lease sites, but the more we looked into the statute, we don't think that FDK statutes provide the ability to provide funding at lease sites. So we've taken that out. If somebody sees it differently, we'd love to hear from you about it, but we looked pretty carefully and we just don't see the ability to provide the funds at lease sites. The other thing, if you look over at page 54, stamp page 54, we do plan on prorating, and we're going to reduce the amount of land acquired to the amount needed for the project. The chart that you'll see there, about a third of the way down on page 54, comes out of Title V, and these are the amounts that the Department of Education says are required for, or Title V says, are required for the number of kindergarten classrooms that are being provided. You'll see what those amounts are. And so, for instance, if you're acquiring an acre to provide to provide land to build a new full-day kindergarten classroom, we're actually, if it's one classroom, we're only going to be able to give you a third of that, or 0.3 of that, I should say, a little less than a third. It's kind of like the way we do for SFP, where the master plan size of the site drives the amount of funding you can receive for site acquisition. It's kind of the same thing we're doing here. I don't think there's anything different about 1860 10.1, 10.2, or 10.3. SFP. There's nothing really different for full-day kindergarten. We just outline, the site acquisition guidelines, hazardous waste removal at either a new site or an existing site. It's pretty standard stuff. Moving on to page 56, 1860.11 sets the dollar-for-dollar matching share for new construction, 50-50. And then section 12 and 13 talk about retrofits. 12 is very similar to what was in new construction. You have the K through 6 SFP modernization grant, the grant amount for fire alarm per pupil. We are providing 35% site development for retrofits as well. We heard from a few different districts that said if they were to provide more full-day kindergarten classrooms, there'd be the need for possibly recreating a drop-off and pickup area. They might need to expand their playground or things like that. So that's why we're providing site development where we don't provide it in SFP for modernization. And then we have the 15% for utilities for 50-year-old buildings if you're retrofitting a 50-year-old building, and project assistance. And those amounts will also be upgraded or adjusted, I should say, through the CCI each year. And section 13 talks about how it's a 60-40 match, just like modernization SFP.
Okay, and then continuing down on page 56, this section we actually need a little bit of help on. It will change on the funding process, most likely at the end of it. I'll explain why. As written, when we were looking at this program and how we fund the priorities, the statute specifies that low-income districts, or financial hardships districts, and low-income school districts get a higher priority. So when we initially created these regulations as written, we created a priority point system where, based on your free and reduced price meal percentage, the higher you are, the more points you get on that sliding scale. And then we had a light switch on financial hardship. If you qualify for the program, you get another 40 points, regardless of how much contribution. So if you qualify for financial hardship, but you happen to have cash, you still qualify and get those 40 points. Our initial thought was, highest scoring points, you get scored first, and we work down the list. And then as we looked at our regulations and how they're drafted here, we are at a point where if two school districts had the same percentage points, two districts got 80 points, how do you fund those two? As we look at the regs, we said do a lottery between those two, and based on whether they indicated whoever won that lottery, we would fund their first project, and then we go on to the next school district. And then we keep going down the percentage points. And the initial tiebreakers was if you got funded once in this round, then you're automatically eliminated from that process, assuming we have limited funds. As we looked at that more, though, we don't know that school districts would do full-day kindergarten for one campus. We think if a school district wants to do full-day kindergarten, they're most likely to do it across their entire school district. So just funding one project doesn't seem like a likely possibility, so we're seeking feedback in that. The edit we're considering right now is we still fund by highest priority, but at the district level. So if you're the highest scoring district in both categories and your total points is the highest per each funding round, then we fund all of your projects before we go to the next highest point project. So a large school district in theory with a high free and reduced price meal and their financial hardship, we'd be funding all their kindergarten classrooms first before we go to the next person in line. And then we go to the next district points. Now, if we reach the case where two districts had the same points, we would do a lottery for that position in line. So we're seeking feedback on what would logically make sense on funding for this program. So if you have ideas, whether today or by email, of another way to fund order, and this continues all the way down the list. If the round's big enough or there's not enough apps, if we hit those projects where nobody has any points and we're just funding, we had an intended date order received because it's a filing round. So we'd follow the same methodology there. But once everybody has 0 points, we're not sure of how we keep going down the list there. So beyond the lottery system. So we definitely want some feedback. But that's one of the edits you'll see going forward to the board if we can get some good ideas that make sense. Otherwise, right now, the idea would be fund by points first and just keep going down. So something to think about on that method. Dot 15 on the bottom of page 57 was describing that you can qualify for hardship assistance. We are going to combine that with dot 16 just because it's just one sentence. So we're going to merge those two. So you'll see some reordering when we do the final version of the regs. The financial hardship criteria, though, is essentially the same as the SFP. If you meet one of those first light switch tests based on your bond indebtedness as a district or your bonding capacity, passing the Prop 39 bond the last couple of years, then you'll qualify for those 40 points. Then, just like SFP, the second determination is how much you contribute towards a project. So, just like we do in SFP, we'll look at your facilities funds, what's available contribution and not encumbered towards projects, and apply that towards these projects. A little departure from SFP, the current rules for SFP are when we process your application, we give you unfunded approval. If you sit on the unfunded list for more than 6 months before you actually get cash, we do a re-review to see if additional cash has become available. Because cash is available immediately in this program, we're not doing any reviews. Once we say you have the cash and we set aside your apportionments, you keep your financial hardship status. We're not going to go back and look at your funds. We're not going to redetermine if you're eligible for the program. Once you're financial hardship, you stay with financial hardship for that particular filing round. We will not be asking for any financial hardship docs up front. We'll initially do a scoring to see how you rank and who we're actually going to process for the board that's within the filing round amount. And then we'll reach out to you and we're providing you 30 days to get us the financial documents to process that one. Our financial hardship team, based on their experience and when we've had to rush through re-reviews, they think 30 days is sufficient. If school districts think otherwise, we'll welcome that feedback too as well. On the top of page 59 is our fund release process. So as we talked about in prior meetings, we are allowing all school districts that don't have DSA approved plans to have the potential for advanced fund releases for phases of the project. So what dot 17A does is if you're requesting advanced design funds on your application for funding, as soon as the board approves your project and sets aside all the funding for your project, all you need to do is give us a signed grant agreement, and then we'll release 40% of your base grant for new construction or 25% of your base grant for retrofit grants upon receiving that grant. What dot 17B does is same thing but also if you're requesting site acquisition funding. So because this program will allow you to set aside cash, what you estimate your purchase price of your acquired land will be, but you may not have actually purchased it yet. As part of the design grant, we also do a site release equal to 2% of your preliminary appraisal to cover those site other costs. So you can do your appraisals, your escrow fees, enter into escrow. Once you're into escrow, then you can apply, you need a grant agreement for that before release of funds as well. And that's true with each phase of the fund releases. And then lastly, for site acquisition, just like SFP, once you've actually entered escrow, you have a purchase price, you'll submit your Form 7002 with us. You'll give us your final appraisal for that project dated within the 6 months. You will give us your actual purchase price, and the site acquisition grants are the one grants we are adjusting in fund release. So we'll true it up, and then we'll release those funds to you too. And then lastly for C is the release of your construction funds. When you do your 7002 fund release authorization, just like S&P, you'll need to have binding contracts for completion of the entire project. So we'll ask for those construction contracts. If you hadn't requested your site acquisition or any design funds, even though you intended to request those releases early, we'll release all the remaining funds left in your account and move forward from there. And then just like in SFP, if anything's not adjusted at that end, we also could adjust it audit too, if the true expenditures aren't aligned yet. If we find your preliminary appraisal is too low or your preliminary estimate of what your site acquisition cost was too low, we can also, subject to available funds, increase your grants to the actual site acquisition cost as well. And then one other grant that we adjust at fund release is your multi-level grants. Now that we have your DSA approved plans and you've entered a contract, we go look at your plans. If you chose not to build a multi-level classroom at that point in time, then we'll remove the multi-level grant from your project. Dot 18 is a grant agreement submittal, just indicating that prior to release of each step of funds, we will request to sign an updated grant agreement if needed. We'll walk through the grant agreement a little bit later today. And then dot 19 is your program reporting requirements. This one I think we also will need an edit, but at the moment, 1 year after we apportion funds to your project, you will need to submit an expenditure report. That expenditure report is due 1 year based on when you've told, or the expenditure report is determining your project is 1 year past your final fund release, or the district tells us earlier that it's 100% complete. Based on those two dates, and I think we need to add this into our regulation, is we've also added a savings report requirement. Well, we haven't added it, but we've clarified it. On the SFP under statute, you just report annually until your savings is spent. This program, because of the limited time we have the funds, we're requiring that all savings be spent within 1 year of telling us your report's 100% complete. So we don't expect a lot of savings in this program because of the dollar amounts, but if you do have savings, you either report it with your final expenditure report or up to 1 year later. Any savings after that 1 year will return to the program for reallocation. Just like SFP also, unexpended funds on the project, if you receive any financial hardship funding for the project, then there are no savings for financial hardship projects. That will be returned to the program. We added some clarifying language that you don't see in SFP, but we won't take back more savings than your actual financial hardship grant, though. And then just like the SFP, any interest earned on state funds in your accounts while you're holding on to the money, that'll be allowed to be expended on eligible project expenditures. But if it's not expended by the end of the project or 1 year after on non-financial hardship projects, then that also will be returned back to the state. 1860.21 spells out the expenditure audit requirements. The statutes for this program mirrored the current statutes for SFP, and that all the audits will go through your local auditors. So our office will work, and the process will be pretty much exactly the same. Over the course of the next year, we'll work with the controller's office to update their audit handbook for the local auditors and build that audit program to there. But it's essentially the same as our program. Just like SFP, there's no longer a 4-year cap on retaining your documents for audit. You retain your documents until the audit occurs. And then lastly, under dot 22, we think it's appropriate we added the requirement that you establish a routine restricted maintenance account within your general fund for maintaining the facilities. At present, on your form, when you apply for funding, the district will certify that they'll create that account as a plan. Now, that's at this moment, that's the limitation on that account, that you've created it, you have a plan to maintain your facilities. Beyond that, it's up to the district's responsibility to actually do it. The requirements for the 3% general fund deposits, 2% that we've seen over the years, those are written into SFP statutes. So that requirement you're not tied to those numbers, but we still have the expectation you create an account with the intent to maintain the facilities. So that's where we move with that one. Okay. Questions on the regs so far? Come on. You can come on up.
Please come on.
So we can hear you. I wanted to add one thing too. We have made a few minor changes to the regulations since we've sent this out. It's really just things like authority sections and little wording things here and there. Nothing substantive, but just to let everybody know that they're still evolving, and I'm sure they'll change a little more once this meeting's over too. But we haven't done anything major. Just FYI.
Alana Cunningham, Jack Schrader's office. I just have a quick question regarding the adjustments that can occur at the end for site acquisition and multi-story. So will you set aside some money? Because we think if you fund, for example, $50 million the first round, and there's no money to make the adjustment, how will you make the adjustment?
It's just like SFP. If there's money there, we'll do the adjustment, but we're not doing a set aside for it. So
if you're out of money, the adjustment won't happen.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first funding cycle, I think we're identifying $37.5 million, and then the remaining, whatever the balance is after that, will be the second round.
Yeah, and ideally the adjustments for site shouldn't be too high. We are requiring kind of a preliminary appraisal, so a school district should have identified a site and provided a preliminary appraisal what they think that would be, so we don't expect the adjustment to be too far off.
Okay.
But yeah, it is still subject to the funds. Multi-level, all you need to do on any district can do this. If you think you're going to do multi-level, you can check the box early and say I plan to do it, and then if you don't do it, we'll remove it.
So it won't be an increase; it would only be a decrease.
Most likely be a decrease.
For multi-level, yeah, right, likely.
Thank you.
Department of Education. Just a quick clarification on the 2%. So in most cases, if this happens, and I think it would be rare, if someone buys a third of an acre and it's worth $10,000. 2,000 is that to cover the appraisals, the DTSC. I mean, the 2% doesn't seem to work at that small of a scale.
The 2% other has a $25,000 minimum. That's
Okay.
the way it's written in, and it's to cover things like you're saying, the soft costs kind of that
Right,
are associated
okay.
with acquisition.
And it's
yeah.
25. Is that what you're seeing these things cost when it?
That one we
comes in?
just copied SF.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure that number.
20-year-old number, or
Yeah.
That's true.
18 or whatever it is. So I don't know if that's a good number or a bad number or whatever it is, especially if it's a hardship type situation.
Right.
What that is. So
We actually don't have stored data on actual
Yeah.
other costs.
And I don't
It's pretty
know.
widely varied.
how many are actually going to be buying a third of an acre or
Right.
whatever it is, but just something.
Yeah. Also, that side of it, just like SFP, if you don't spend it on your escrow costs and those, it rolls into your base grant. So.
Hello.
Good morning. Rebecca Curley on behalf of Coalition for Adequate School Housing. I had a question on the pupil grant request. New construction, but I guess it could also be a question for the retrofit program. Will it all be multiples of 25? So if you've got one classroom, 25 grants, two classrooms, 50 grants? Or is it going to be related to that number that's the gap number on, let's say you've got 15 pupils that you can't house with your facilities for full-day kindergarten? Will it all be multiples of 25 on the funding side? Because there's also a relationship to the back end when you adjust your baseline. I'm curious about that.
We rounded up on their examples.
Did we round up on examples?
Yeah, I saw in the examples, but would you ever foresee a situation where it's a new construction
So you're-
project request for only 10 pupil grants rather than 25?
Yeah, I think what we've shown is like, so if you have 26 kindergarten pupils, so we've state loads at 25 kindergarten kids per classroom. If we saw, say, 26 existing kindergarten kids on campus,
Right.
we would round up to show
Two
that you have a
classrooms.
need for 2 classrooms. So you would, if you have one existing kindergarten classroom, you would have a shortfall of 1 classroom. So you're funding for 1 classroom loaded at 25.
Got it. So it's always going to be the loading standard
That was our
is the
intent.
equivalent of the grant request.
Right.
Would a district have the option of requesting fewer than the 25 grants?
Well, you're not using eligibility, so it's gonna be the number of pupils enrolled there.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking on the back end, the eligibility adjustment for the baseline, it's always going to be 25.
Yes.
50,
That's true.
whatever. Okay.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and also using an example, so if we saw 12 TK classroom pupils and 12 kindergarten classrooms being only a combined total of 24, then that's only 1 classroom of need or...
Yeah, we wouldn't
Right.
we wouldn't separate them.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, we'll move on to the forms, beginning on stat page 4. So we have 3 forms in this program. The first one is the application for funding. Very similar to how we have the SFP ones laid out. We tried to group things a little better than SFP. That one migrated over time and flow didn't necessarily work. So we tried to group things together, I guess you could say. So the instructions kind of walk you through 2 things. One is you're going to use this form to request the grants that you need for your project, and based on these numbers is how we fund you. So like we talked about multi-level, if you plan to do multi-level, then check the box, we'll give you the grant. If you have DSA approved plans, then you only check it if you actually have it. On page 6, I'll walk you through the different sections. So parallel to the regs, and we actually have to update those regulations sections there, though we have 1A through D. So you have 4 application types you could possibly apply for the program. The difference between them, A and C, you have DSA approved plans. So you're going to get cash apportionments. Right away, you can request fund releases as soon as you can show us you have a construction contract. Now, if you're applying under that method, we wouldn't be doing advanced releases for site or design. It's an all or nothing grant and release. And tied to those in the instructions, you'll see, provide us your DSA plan approval number, provide us your DSA plan number, CDs, plan approvals, what have you. And that's why there's if applicable throughout. B and C, you're requesting in advance, so you don't have DSA approved plans. You may not have acquired site. Any part of your project is not construction ready, basically. You would go for those two types of grants. In section 2 is the poo-poo grant we talked about. How many pupils are you going to be requesting for this project? Do you have a shortfall of 1 classroom? You put 25 there. A shortfall of 2 classrooms, you put 2. Number of classrooms is tied to that number, so it's simple math right there. C through G are all applicable. It depends on the nature of your project. If you're not requesting site acquisition, then we wouldn't necessarily request your site approval letters. If you have DSA approved plans, you're construction ready, then we'd like to see those numbers there as we move forward. So which boxes you check are tied to whatever you check in box 1 through D. 3 is for your project priority funding orders, so within a school district. So this is with the mindset, if we do a lottery for a certain place in line on the funding list, if the district wins a lottery, which project do they want us to fund first as they work down the list? Even in the case of limited funds, and we keep what our current proposal may be to fund the highest points for one school district first. If they have 20 projects, but we can only fund 10 of them, we need to know which ones they want us to fund in what order. So the priority projects is just to determine there. 4 is preference points. If you know your free and reduced price meal or requesting priority, we request that you put that in. We're doing it based on the latest published info by CDE, so we can compare to that. Box 4, if you're requesting points for priority for being a financial hardship district or are requesting financial hardship funding, you would check the financial hardship box. If you have your documents to qualify, or if you're familiar with SAP or Phase 1 docs, we will work on separate checklists for this program. But if you have those, you can send it with the app. Otherwise, when we process your app, we'll ask for it at that point. But if you at least know you want the points, check the box for that. Box 5 is for if you had selected application type A or B in section 1. If you would like any of those grants, they are optional. Keep in mind it is a district matching program, so anything you request you will have to match unless you're financial hardship. Box 6, if you're requesting site acquisition funding, enter in all the relevant amounts tied to the cost of your site. Hazardous waste, same thing there. Box 7 is if you chose in 1B or 1D for your type of application. If you're doing a retrofit project and you request these grants, just check the boxes there. And 8 is more for tracking purposes because we do get a lot of questions from school districts, the type of your construction delivery method that you plan to use, and in the case of if you have awarded contracts for this project, we'd like to know those dates as well. Just like SFP, we ask for a certification from your architect that the plans have been approved by a DSA or that parts of it don't need to, if that's the case. Moving on to page 7. We don't anticipate this being an issue, but just like SFP, we are asking the district architect to certify that 6% of the project is for construction-related work. And then we've updated all the certifications strictly for this program. So anything that was SFP related, this mirrors what we have on our application for funding for the school facility program, but anything not tied to this program we've removed and stripped it down to just what's tied to the full-day kindergarten program. And then the only thing to note on the bottom of page 7, there's 2 check boxes on the bottom right there. If you have a certification or school board resolution that you are doing full-day kindergarten, you already have that, you would check that box and put the date of that resolution occurred. Or you check the other box that prior to completion of this project, you'll have that in place by then. When you turn in your final expenditure report, we'll ask for a copy of that resolution at that point in time. The next form is our 7002, our fund release authorization form. So you do not need this form if you're requesting advanced design funds. You just need to return your grant agreement. We will automatically release that. If you're asking for just to release the site acquisition funds, we will send you a grant agreement based on what you filled out on your application for funding. Once you actually enter an escrow and have a full appraisal, or final appraisal for that project, you would check these various boxes. You would get your CD approval letters, provide those to those, and we would release your site acquisition funds so you can continue along with the purchase of your site. And then at such time you're ready, up to 1 year after your apportionment, you could do part 2 and request the release of your construction funds. So just like SFP, you certify the binding contracts for the completion of your project. In the case of the full-day kindergarten, though, you have to have your matching share at the time of fund release. In the SFP, there's a clause that says by the time the project is done, you will have contributed. That part has been eliminated in the statute for this program. So you do need to certify the application. Your applicable matching share has already been deposited or expended prior to our fund release. If you were funded with advanced release of design funds, we're asking for your DSA approval and DSA application numbers at this point in time. You should have signed by statute your contracts only after you have these approvals. So we're verifying those dates at this point in time. And then part 4 is due on this form, just information for us so that we know where we are on the fund release process, that you either have submitted a grant request, grant agreement for this phase of the project, or that it's accompanying the form. One or the other. And then lastly is our expenditure report form. This is a simplified form. We kind of mirrored what we did in the emergency repair program. This form is due upon completion of your project up to 1 year after fund release. We're asking just a summary of all the district funding. So we're helping you do the math that we haven't done on some of our other forms. But you sum up all the district funds, interest earned on state funds, what's your total expenditures. If you overexpend the project, we're done. If you have savings, then we ask you to fill that in the box G. If you have it at this point in time and know you've already expended the savings, you'll move on to box 3 and also attach those expenditures. Just like all our other programs, we're asking for a detailed listing of all your expenditures, warrant date, warrant amounts, payees, description, a brief description of each one. So same thing there. If you know your expenditures for savings, they'll report it with this form, and you use box 3 for that. If you still have savings and haven't used it all up, you have 1 more year to report all your savings to us, you would just resubmit this form again. We have 2 boxes in the upper right to show that you are doing a final savings report, and you just report the last of your savings to us. And then lastly, box 5, you check the box. If we didn't already receive your board resolution that you're doing full-day kindergarten, we'd ask for it at this point in time that, okay, now that my project is done, I have my resolution, we are doing full-day kindergarten. I think that's it with the forms. Any questions on those? Good line.
So I have a quick question regarding financial hardship. So if a district overspends in the kindergarten program in their financial hardship district, and then 3 months later they submit a funding application for an SFP project, will those over-expended funds be considered a contribution to the SFP project, or are they completely different?
Seems like it'd be separate.
Yeah, I think our intent is separate programs.
Totally
We can check on
separate.
that. We can clarify that.
Yeah, we hadn't intended any 3-year lockout out of full-day kindergarten. The program won't last long enough to do that. So if they're
Okay.
overexpended, we just move on. It was our initial thought.
Okay, so it won't be
Yeah.
applied to the.
Right. We can clarify that.
Okay.
too, not fine.
We'll clarify. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the forms? Okay, we'll talk about the grant agreement now.
All right, looking at page 12 in your packet. The grant agreement that we have here today, it's very similar to the one that you were used to seeing for the school facility program. We went through and we updated all the references accordingly. Of course, it's all referring to full day kindergarten now in those forms, not the SFP forms, but we really haven't changed much of it. So unless anybody has specific questions about it, I don't think I need to go through every section. There are some differences that I would like to point out in the retrofit. If you turn to page 35, in the retrofit area for the common eligible project expenditures, we've added in some stuff there for site development because we didn't have that in SFP. And we've added in the ability to add square footage through the retrofit program as well. So, new foundations and things like that you would need to do if you had to expand your room to meet the Title V requirements for a larger size or to build a bathroom on it, for instance. But aside from that, there's really not anything major that we've changed in here other than, like I said, the references to authority and just all the different references throughout to not be the SFP anymore. So I don't think that there's much more to say than that. It's a very similar document to what you've been seeing for the SFP now for quite some time. But we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have related to the grant agreement or anything else.
So if we can, I want to circle back to the funding order, because I know I see a few puzzle faces in the room. But if you have any thoughts now, I'd appreciate it. It may not be the best way. If not, definitely please think about it, how that might work, and shoot us some notes. We'd appreciate that. Otherwise, right now, like I mentioned, our thought is we sum your two preference point scores, and if your district has the most points, we fund all of your projects before moving to the next highest points, and we just keep on going from there. And then after that, when we reach the point that points don't work anymore, then we do a lottery system, district by district, and then project by project. Nothing?
Oh, Michael, could you bring that chart up again?
Yeah.
Oh.
Which chart do you want?
Yes, thank you.
The waiting.
Right. How?
Sure.
What I can see the ranges of free and reduced price meal, what each
Sure.
amount was in there, but they would have equal weight. The two factors being financial hardship is yes, no.
Correct.
Yeah, it's 40 or 0
At that
basically.
point of time, and then the other one.
We're looking at page 57, by the way.
It's on up to 100%. So.
Yeah, it starts at 65 at 60% and goes up to
Okay.
100. Yeah, and 4 points up to 40.
All right.
As we pulled the free and reduced price meal data for the state, we sorted in descending order, 100% down, just to see what the impact would be. And there's in the top, I would say 80%, or not top, 80% and higher. There's not a lot of huge school districts that we see where a huge school district that would also be financial hardship would come in with a whole bunch of projects and take all the money. So we don't anticipate it being an issue, but it could be.
Right. And
You don't know.
that's school or district being reduced. That's district.
That's based on district.
District
Statute
level.
said district.
Statute just says district. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so not by
And it'll be based on the time that they come in with their submittal at that point, basically as an as of date.
All right.
But we haven't heard from a lot of school districts if it's a concern. Would a school district, because our first proposal was one application per school district
Right.
before you come back around to this school district again. But we don't know how many school districts would do full-day kindergarten for just one school site.
Right. And a way, if the free and reduced price meals is more variable, so if that were a larger scale number of points on that side, would that reduce the number of ties or kind of distribute it a bit more? Because a district either 40 points or not on financial hardship. So if there's more variation or more points given on that, it kind of targets a different piece.
Yeah, but you're still talking about it at the district level, right?
Right. Or, and because that is if there's a very large financial hardship district out there, you'll fund one district.
Yeah.
That would do this. Yeah. So that and I don't
Potentially.
know potentially. However, the handicapping of all that works.
Yeah.
So that is, and I don't know, by reassigning the weight of the free and reduced price meal, that may alter the. Hard to say. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We had briefly considered financial hardship too, making that a sliding scale based on, say, percentage of district contribution towards their match. I think you still have the same issue from a district to district level. Do we fund one project per school district or fund it school district by school district?
And so on the other side, so a very small school or district that has combination classes, say 12 and 12, kindergarten, first grade, so they're eligible for one.
Yes.
One.
Yes.
Right.
A full classroom.
Even if they're sitting in a kindergarten design classroom, do they get a first grade classroom?
Because you have to lack the facilities as a major requirement of the program. So if you have a kindergarten compatible classroom, CD agrees that it is a kindergarten classroom. If you have 12 kids in there, then they are housed.
Even with the first graders in it.
Yes. Because you don't lack facilities for kindergarten. guess you could say, lack of first grade class.
Right, yeah, so we'll build another kindergarten-sized classroom, you'll have 2 and put first graders in or something. Okay, all right. Okay.
So please think about that. We will restructure the regs for that section a little bit. As Brian mentioned, our regs, we found a few statute references. We're going to clean up a little bit more for flow. We thought it more appropriate to move the financial hardship determination before you even get to the points of financial hardship from an ordering standpoint. So we're going to do a little bit of reordering there. There's a few grammatical stuff that we'll clean up, but anything major we'll definitely point out the full cover item. As we work towards the October board, same thing we always do. Our goal is to publish the final version at least a week before the board, so you can see that. So if you have any other comments as you see the final version. As you mentioned in the beginning, if by next Thursday you can submit us any ideas you have, any comments on anything, the forms, the grant agreement, the regulations, please email me and Brian or the full day kindergarten team. Their contact information is updated on our webpage now. Yeah, we're looking for all that so we have a clean product going forward and keep the program moving. If there's no other questions or comments, I think that concludes the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.